Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 86. It's Friday again. And what another wild week. I mean, every single week now. I guess this is just the world we live in. And I think it's going to accelerate faster and faster and faster. But don't worry, I've got you covered. As we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies, I'm going to cover everything that you need to know and that you missed. And we're going to follow the money so that you don't fall for the same trickery that everybody that listens to politicians or reads the media falls for, because they are lying to you. And today we're going to be covering this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. If we have not met already, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over the topic of in investing and money, and then from the beginning of Bitcoin. And what we do at Bitcoin Hard Talk is we have hard talk about hard money, and we follow the money and cover everything that they're not showing you by actually following the monetary flows instead. And this week, the main theme is going to be that Iran is not the one that is going to lead us into World War III. The entire world that does not watch Bitcoin Hard Talk thinks right now that the US is about to enter the war with Iran, and then it's going to be an escalation to World War III, because we follow the money. And if you are a long-term listeners, you have been watching the show. And by show, I mean movie. And by movie, I mean theater. And I'm going to explain exactly what that means in part 3 in This Week in Geopolitics. What we're going to be doing this week is we're going to have our overarching theme, which is what's been happening in Iran and whether we're going to World War III. But in each bit, we're going to be doing this week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics. So in This Week in Bitcoin, I've got a few stories to cover for you. But of course, in line with the theme, we're going to be covering the Iranian crypto exchange hack that happened just this week, and the impact it had on the banking hack in Iran as well, and what the impact was, so that you can protect yourself wherever you are in the world. This week in macro, we're going to be covering the market and why the market is telling us that we're not going to World War III, and the market is not expecting the US to join the war. And I'll tell you why and what to look for. And then finally, in part 3, we'll be covering This Week in Geopolitics, where I will break it down exactly why the US, and if they do join the war with Iran, what it will be, what it will mean, and how it won't escalate to World War III while the whole world is panicking about it. I'm going to make a front row seat, and you can get ahead based upon following the money, geo-financial analysis, how it has a different story. So without further ado, let's jump straight into This Week in Bitcoin, why Iran is not going to create World War III. And we're going to start with This Week in Bitcoin, with the main theme being the Iranian crypto exchange hack that has now become a tool for war, financial weapons and mass destruction fired. Right. So meanwhile, first thing is we've been covering the stable coins, for a long time, for over a decade now, since the first one was created in 2014 on top of Bitcoin to allow people to send digital dollars. Well, now, over a decade later, in the US, the Senate has officially passed the Genius Act. And this is going to allow for crypto stable coins and a bill and a regulatory environment. It is going to change everything within the banking sector, but it is still a iteration on the debt-based Ponzi scheme, which is why we still need to protect ourselves with peaceful proof of work, i.e. Bitcoin. So what the stablecoin bill means is that now there is a regulatory environment within the US in order to issue digital dollars on top of blockchains that is slightly different from the fractional reserve banking system. Firstly, all stable coins are full reserve, but by full reserve, the main asset that they purchase is that somebody comes along and deposits some dollars. So you go off your fiat currency. How was the fiat currency? It was created at a bank through fractional reserve banking. So those dollars are still part of a debt-based Ponzi scheme, but you then take those dollars and you go for an off-ramp where you deposit those dollars at a stablecoin issuer, and that stablecoin issuer gives you a blockchain representation of those dollars. The largest one is Tether, which is approximately $150 billion that back it of assets. Once you have that issuance of a stablecoin, You move away from the banking system, which is a guilty until proven innocent system, because it's a centralized database. And so every time you borrow money from a bank, it creates a new digital dollar. And that digital dollar incurs an interest that needs to be repaid. That interest doesn't exist, which means that you have to create new debt in order to pay off the old debt, which is why the entire world is in debt right now. And that's why the government is $37 trillion in debt. It's why corporations leverage debt. It's why those that create debt get to rule the world practically, because it is backed by a proof of weapons network. Some people think it's backed by gold. It's actually backed by genocide, apartheid, death, destruction, violence. And that's why I call it a proof of weapons network. It needs war in order to perpetuate prince. And the big, beautiful bill that Trump is putting in right now is to create a bunch over $1 trillion of digital dollars, borrow it from the government side and hand it over to military industrial complex so that they can go kill people around the world. And then they can also invest in technology like Palantir so that they can build a surveillance state, and the stablecoin issuer and the Trump, the dollars that are created as a result of that roll the debt cycle over and over again. And so what happens with a stablecoin? Well, once the dollars come in, you get full reserves on that stablecoin. So you can see the stablecoin issuer will list all the assets that it's backed by. What do they do with those dollars? They buy treasuries, they buy US debt primarily. And so now you've got a mechanism for the government selling debt, and you've got a digital dollar that can be sent on a blockchain, and the stablecoin issuer gets to earn all the interest of buying that bond. And so the higher the interest rate, the more that they earn. And then what they typically do is they take that yield, that amount that is earned by borrowing it from the government, or lending it to the government rather, and then they buy Bitcoin with it. So they end up getting a free Bitcoin position at the expense of the taxpayer. That's how stablecoin issuers work in a debt-based Ponzi scheme model, which is why Trump wants one, why Elon wants one, why every single corporation, Amazon wants one, Facebook wants one. They'll all have one because they are the final rollover of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, where they would like to dump their bags of debt on you. And you can use it, in order to make payments. It's a very convenient way of doing it. Because in the banking system, when the money is created in a centralized database, they have fractional reserves. And those fractional reserves mean that they don't have the money. So when, for example, Peter Thiel comes up on a space, as he did a couple of years back when I was on the space, and tells everyone, withdraw your money from Silicon Valley Bank, he gets to engineer a bank run because the money's not there. They can't pay you. And then Bill Ackman came up on the same space and lobbied the government saying, I will buy the bank for $1, of course, as long as you underwrite the whole system. So then the government comes along, or the Federal Reserve creates a new tool, a bank long-term rate or whatever it is, the new tool, and they guarantee it. And then they socialize the losses and privatize the gains, which is why Bill Ackman and Peter Thiel can come along and engineer a bank run so that they can buy the bank for $1 and you pay the bill. The inflation comes along, more wealth inequality, and then they get to create more and more digital dollars, as well as investing in companies that are going to be issuing these stable coins. They leverage the debt-based Ponzi scheme to the highest extent possible. And when the Ponzi scheme gets so bad that there is riots on the streets because people are homeless, they're wondering why they can't afford stuff, they create technology like Palantir to make sure that the technology that was beta tested in Ukraine with drones and Gaza with genocide and occupation as a service can be used on you, because Palantir now is engineering civil unrest within America, within Europe, within UK, so that you opt in, just like the Patriot Act, to more and more surveillance. And if you step out of line and use your Second Amendment right and hand up your gun, you'll end up with a drone up your ass with a social credit score and being told you better not do that. Freedom of speech doesn't really matter anymore, because It didn't protect you from this system, which is why we Bitcoin. We Bitcoin because we're able to resist against the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme. Every dollar in Bitcoin is a dollar out of the Federal Reserve System. Every dollar that you don't borrow drains the swamp from the banks. Every dollar that you held, every dollar in Bitcoin that you hold in self-custody is a boycott against BlackRock and the asset managers that are engineering these wars that have control over the deep state through their military industrial complex portfolio and bank portfolio and technocracy portfolio and big pharma portfolio that engineer all these different types of events. And that's what backs up the proof of weapons network. So this is a movement towards full reserve. There's still a debt-based Ponzi scheme. But you get to actually see the assets behind it transparently. Also, there's another benefit. Rather than guilty until proven innocent, it is innocent until proven guilty. Because once you take it off the platform, away from the issuer, you can send it. Now, it's not like Bitcoin where it exists in a distributed proof of work supercomputer. It exists on the database of the issuer and on the blockchain. And so they have to put code in it as per the regulations, where if you're committing crime with it or doing something they don't like, they can put it on an OFAC list. They can freeze the stable coin. It still has to comply with the same things, but also Palantir gets to do blockchain analysis and create some kind of surveillance as well around it. This is the world we're moving to. As the government's engineers civil unrest as we get to the end of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and they try to find another market to buy that debt, and stablecoin is why Genius Act is happening right now. They can then perpetuate it around the world, but fortunately, we're entering into a multipolar world where we can resist against it, and anybody that listens to Bitcoin Hard Talk knows that you resist with hard money in self-custody. The digital version is Bitcoin. The physical version, which normally requires a custodian because it's very hard to use, spend, audit, store, is gold. And they both have different use cases, but Bitcoin is where people have been able to beat the inflation that's caused by this network. Okay, so the Genius Act means that this is happening. You should utilize it, understand what it is, and only use it for spending when you need stability. And this is going to go viral. This is going to be the new system. There is going to be, for example, Stripe's going to allow you to take payments. You'll receive those fiat currency as payment. Then you can offboard it into a stable coin. And then you can go from stablecoin and you can have a business without a bank. Beautiful. I've been waiting my whole life. I've been doing it. We've been using stable coins in our company in order to pay staff around the world. It's incredibly useful. But we don't keep our money in stable coins because that depletes your wealth. And you make sure that whatever you've got left over, you're saving in Bitcoin and you're doing that long term. And you have a simple rule. I need to earn more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Always remember that. So Genius Act is here. The technocracy are going to take over the financial system. Banks are issuing them. And there's going to be all sorts of regulatory captures in order to say, how do we transition from this fractional reserve model to this full-back stablecoin model? What's the right mix? What's the right blend? And it also creates a speculative attack. We will watch with interest. This is the monetary reform. You can fade out one, fade out others. We'll keep going through it. But this is the foundation of the world reserve currency transitioning to blockchain-based assets. It also opens up all sorts of crazy opportunities. One such thing, before we start going through some of the other stories, is a story we've been following for a while in Bitcoin Hard Talk. The infamous Justin Sun and his new integration into the corruption of the Trump administration. And remember, when I talk about the Trump administration, I just talk about whoever's president. I used to do the same when it was Biden, Trump before that, Obama before that, whoever it is, they all work for the same people, the same system. And it is just a distraction to make you think that there's going to be change and difference. Well, clearly there isn't, because the system is too bigger. It's too big. The proof of weapons network is bigger than any one person. And in most cases, presidents and prime ministers and middle management anyway. But what is it that we talk about? Corporations are able to buy politicians. And by buying politicians and owning wealth, which is why I want you to own more Bitcoin every month than the previous month, not financial advice, but everybody that's done it for an extended time frame has beaten the system, beaten every hedge fund manager, beaten all real estate, beaten gold, beaten every asset, beaten the stock market, beaten the Federal Reserve banknotes, beaten the bond market, beaten absolutely everything, which is how you build economic wealth, economic power. So if eventually you want to play in the politics game, rather than being the idiot that thinks politicians and engaging in politics makes a difference, you realize the only way to influence politics is to actually use lobby power. Justin Sun is doing that. Let's go through a story right now. So who's Justin Sun? So Justin Sun was a blockchain entrepreneur that came from China. And I've been warning against some of the things that I think are suspicious around his ventures. He bought a really old exchange, which was launched in America. It was called Petroleum. It was before Binance. And it was the very first, like there was a few of them. There was Petroleum and Bittrex way back around 2012, 2013, 2014 that were the main crypto to crypto exchanges as stablecoins started to get traction. And he bought one of those old exchanges. It was called Petroleum. He also bought one of the largest ones in China called Huobi. He also used this. And by the way he made his wealth is that he launched a blockchain. So he launched his Tron blockchain. You know, I don't participate in it. I've never used it. You know, it's really cheap because it's more centralized. It has more attack vectors. As you know, these blockchains are not the same. There's only one Bitcoin proof of work. But anyway, he started to use it. He started to get lots of traction around putting stable coins on top of it. And essentially, he would buy his way to influence, integrate it with the exchanges. And then he bought a stable coin called TUSD. Now, I believe that stable coin was used to plug big holes in different exchanges. And he was in the class of the SBF and FTXs. You know, these are my opinions. You know, but somehow he escaped because he was able to use his, you know, vast wealth from playing these different platforms. And he seemed to have some kind of escape velocity from going down the same place that SBF went. Now, in the end, during the whole crackdown during the Biden administration, Justin Sun was investigated by the SEC. And it was all sorts of stuff that he was being sued for. But you know that when Trump administration came, he was reversing many of the operations like Operation Chokepoint 2.0, which is corruption at the highest level, SEC, BlackRock, Proof of Weapons Network, Federal Reserve, to try and take down the market in order to take over the market by the traditional financial players. We covered that many times in the past. But when it transitioned to the Trump administration, he reversed all of the corrupt stuff in order to support the industry so that Trump could enrich himself with Bitcoin. He's probably tripled his net worth by playing around with meme coins, shit coins, converting it all to Bitcoin, doing Bitcoin mining, launching Bitcoin ETFs, launching stable coins that can buy Bitcoin, and doing deals in the Middle East and converting them to stable coins, getting the yield that comes from the high rates of the US debt, converting that to Bitcoin, handing it over to his son and family, whatever. He's been doing all sorts of stuff to get more Bitcoin so that he can take advantage of the end of the debt-based Ponzi scheme as it runs through. Now, what happened? Trump launched a company called World Liberty Financial, and he was selling a token. He wanted to sell about $350 million worth of this shitcoin. And in doing it, it didn't do too well, even though he had the presidency and the full backing of everything he could pull off. So Justin Sun came along. Justin said, I've got an idea. I'll put $75 million into World Liberty Financial. Okay. And so he was able to build the relationship with the Trump family. And then suddenly the SEC case goes away. Let me just pull something up here. I'm just going to check. There we go. That's what I was looking to do. Okay. Now, suddenly the SEC investigation goes away. Now, I could be reading too much into this. A lot of SEC investigations went away. This is a new regime within the SEC to be more crypto friendly. But Justin Sun's one was one of those ones where it very conveniently went away after investing $75 million into the shitcoin. With that, the coin was able to like 10x the price and sell it to Trump fans and MAGA fans and all sorts of stuff. And then eventually sold it out because of that, because of the announcement. Now, what was announced after that? The SEC case goes away. The token sale is sold out. This is being used in order to bring more Bitcoin. By the way, I've got a bit of a sore throat. I've been off this week, so I might need to make sure that I get more water. And by the end of this, my throat might be very tickly, but bear with me. I'm going to make sure the show must go on anyway. Now, suddenly, the Trump's family are now joining the advisory board of Justin Sun's new public company that is going to take Tron, the Tron Foundation or something like that, public. Now that we've got all these public companies going public in the US, excuse me, there is a company and it is called, what's it called? Dominari Holdings. Dominari Holdings is apparently connected to Tron, and this is Justin Sun's company. And it is going to and that company has now become the largest holder of Trump token, the meme coin. You can't make this stuff up. If this is not a shitcoin casino of collateralized debt obligations and mortgage-backed securities in the crypto era of real-world meme coin, tokenized shitcoin trickery, then this is the personification of that, using the public markets to take it public and weaponizing the administration and the presidency to dump a bunch of shit on you so that they end up with a bunch of Bitcoin, and Justin Sun is doing it at the highest level with the Trump family. Now, what happens now? Trump issues a stablecoin, which is called USD1, and the Trump linked stablecoin gets put on the Tron blockchain. So now you've got the Trump stablecoin on the Tron blockchain in exchange for investing in the World Liberty Financial shitcoin, which now is going to take a Tron Foundation public so that it can buy some Trump meme coin, and the stablecoin is issuers by doing backhand deals so that the higher the rates and the higher the debt-based Ponzi scheme goes, Trump can pull out more Bitcoin and the Trump family can pull out more Bitcoin the worse the economy gets. It is essentially the biggest, utilize the capital markets, debt capital markets, presidency, and the administration to take advantage of the fact that this is the end of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and using the full craziness of shitcoinery in order to achieve. So now the stable coin is on the Tron blockchain, which is Justin Sun's blockchain, and Dominari Holdings is basically helping Tron go public on, excuse me, it's going to be a bit of a rough one today. Now Dominari Holdings is helping Tron go public on the New York Stock Exchange. And guess who's going to be on the team? It is expected that on the team is Eric Trump. Eric Trump is going to be taking a leadership role at a new company called Tron Inc., according to the Financial Times. And maybe Eric will also be on there as well. Or maybe we'll see. Eric has denied that that's actually going to happen, but we'll see whether it does happen. And then what comes next? Trump's other public company, Truth Social, is now filing for issuing their own Bitcoin ETF and Ethereum ETF, while World Liberty Financial does decentralized loans through these stable coins on World Liberty Financial, and they're building the entire ecosystem. Do you think this is going to be used in order to take the next issuance of debt, back it by this stable coin, and then find through trickery and dealery, people like Tron and Justin Sun are able to weaponize this network in order to find a way of creatingly rolling over the debt? It is coming, it is happening, and the Genius Act is here. Now, as I said, this does actually genuinely provide iterative improvements to the financial system. It's not all bad. To be able to have everyone in the world, the adoption that can come from stablecoins, be able to accept a QR code, you be able to spend it, this is very disruptive to the banking system. Not only is it disruptive to the banking system, it means that the stablecoin ecosystem can really, really grow, which is one step away from integrating programmatically stablecoins to be able to buy Bitcoin and save in Bitcoin. Guess who's going to do that? And who's going to manage that for you? Artificial intelligence agents. And so this is all moving in a direction of programmatically being able to use fiat currency, demonetize the banks, and then thank you, you are able to exit through the Bitcoin proof of work. This is why you need to get to grips with this and self-custody now, because it is the future of the system. Excuse me. Okay, so that's the whole story there. There were some other stories as well. Vietnam passed a law to officially recognize crypto assets. So Vietnam has historically been very, I've been over to Vietnam a few times. Way back in the day, I went and met like the people that created the Bitcoin community in Vietnam way back in like 2015 era. It was pretty strict, but now we've got the recognition of it as crypto assets as well. And then the final story I want to cover on the crypto side for this week in Bitcoin was how crypto, Bitcoin, stable coins are becoming so significant. They're actually becoming a tool for some of the conflicts that we'll be covering in the geopolitical section in part 3. So the announcement that happened this week was that the Iranian crypto exchange, it's called Nobitex. I haven't used it before. I wasn't familiar with it. But Nobitex, the Iranian crypto exchange, was hacked. It was basically an Israeli-linked hacking event, and it's a group that exists within Israel, and it has claimed responsibility for a $90 million, hack of the Iranian cryptocurrency exchange. Now, who that belongs to, we shall see. But I'm starting to really think, given how we know how this world works when we follow the money and the different types of operations, this group called, what's it called? Gunjensky Durandi. Maybe someone knows what that actually means. But this is basically Farsi for a predatory sparrow. So this was the mission that they created. And they said that it had basically hacked the exchange. And the day after, it claimed it had destroyed. There was not only the hack of the exchange. So this hacking group within Israel hacked the exchange. It also, the day after, hacked a bunch of the banks and said that it had destroyed data at the largest state-owned bank, which is called SIPA. Excuse me, anyone from Iran that says that I'm saying that wrong. But the SIPA bank was also hacked. This is a tool that is being used as part of the economic financial weapons of mass destruction. But this has always been the tool. Every war starts with a currency war. And when we go through the background on some of the operations that lead up to this, this is the importance of owning your own Bitcoin and self-custodying your own Bitcoin. Now, I'm starting to ask the questions. We're always told, for as long as I can remember in the Bitcoin and crypto sector, that whenever there's these major hacks of exchanges, just for example, Bybit was an exchange. I think they got hacked, the largest hacked, over $1 billion hacking for a bunch of ETH. But we're always told that it is Lazarus, the North Korean hacker group. And we're always told that it is those pesky North Korean state-sponsored terrorism. I'm wondering whether it was the Israeli groups all along. I wouldn't be surprised if this has all along been a psyop while these Israeli hacker groups have been benefiting from hacking all of these exchanges and blaming on the pesky North Koreans so that you can just say it was the damn communists, as they always say. We know Operation Gladio, the deceit. We know what Mossad is, and we know how these operations work. So I've got no evidence for that, but I find it interesting that this is the first time that they've claimed ownership for some of these cryptocurrency exchange hacks. And it makes me question, was it Lazarus Group or was it the Israeli hacking groups all along? Now, I also just want to help give a little bit background as well, which is slightly crypto related, slightly macro, slightly geopolitics. They're all blurring the lines as well. Before the Israeli strike on Iran that we'll be covering in part 3, in May 2025, Iran had actually agreed to explore setting up a joint bank that is connected to the international financial system. It was actually agreed. It was a signed agreement that they were actually working on. This is May 5, right before, these negotiations. What that implies to me is that there was, a genuine effort to progress. And what I'll be covering in part 3 around how I believe this is all theater. But there was already the integration of a de-sanctionized Iran beta testing into its integration into the traditional Western financial system as well. It was actually set up in Oman, and Oman is, a neighbor of Iran, and it was under the Omani infrastructure. Oman, in regards to the Middle East, is actually the only country with essentially White House approved in the Middle East to be able to do business with Iran. So Oman has been approved to circumvent sanctions, or approved by the White House to do business with Iran. There was a bank set up in order to do a joint venture in order to connect those systems with Iran. Now, if you've read Operation Gladio, that I've always covered, the CIA operations where you have strategic tension to create war, and the one that was most profitable, $8 trillion of profits for the proof of weapons network to prop up the dollar, was the strategic tension between Iran and Israel. Well, anyway, this financial system was being built. We were entering towards negotiations. I'll cover more in the geopolitical section, but you already started to see that, these connections were being made. The banking infrastructure in Oman essentially is heavily monitored. So this is an integration through Oman into the Western financial system to circumvent sanctions, but state approved by the White House. And the reporting system would be set up to basically report international monitoring authorities. This implies to me that Iran was on the way to normalization in the region at the same time as working with BRICS, because my theory has been all along that the Middle East is going to be the center of a multipolar world order between the BRICS financial system and the Western financial system, which is now controlled by BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network. You will be familiar with all my theories as well. But these systems are being connected, which is why it kind of builds into my theory, which I'm slowly building up to, that I'll cover more in part 2. And I've covered in previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. And I'll be covering more in part 3, why this war will not be World War III. In fact, this is the engineered solution to what I believe will be the multipolar world order, and is going to usher in what I've been covering all along. This is more evidence from following the money that these different networks are being set up. Stable coins are going to be integrated. The Middle East as a tax neutral jurisdiction, we're going to have the lifting of sanctions in a normalization process. And what we're witnessing, that I'll be covering in part 3, is the execution to that world order in an acceptable way. When you follow the money, that's what it's telling me. What does it mean for you? Banking means it is centralized database. Genius Act means that you can use that for your spending money. But your job is to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Your job is to boycott the central bank systems. And your job is to utilize the world's largest distributed supercomputer so you are not stuck in the middle of these geopolitical games that are subject to jurisdictions. Your job is to boycott the financial terrorists by holding it in self-custody rather than handing it over to BlackRock and other custodians and ETF providers to hold it for you. And that is all the stories that happened this week in Bitcoin and this transition that we're going through into a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. Right. If you enjoyed that, in part 2, we're going to be doing the same, but for everything that happened this week in macro and how the markets are telling us that what we're seeing in Iran is not what the media is telling us. I'll be analyzing that from the macroeconomic perspective in part 2. And then in part 3, I'm going to be going through what is happening on the battlefield. And I'm going to go through some of the CIA covert operations that led to this so that you can follow the money, understand what this is really about, so that you don't listen to the media propaganda that is tricking you into taking different actions. Just before we go into part 2, do me a favor. If you are enjoying this, please put a comment below. If you're watching it on YouTube, we break this into 3 parts. If you'd like to watch part 2, you can watch it there. Or if you're watching the live stream, we'll go right into it as the whole video. Now, we are at 99,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for getting us there. We need 1,000 new subscribers. Can we do it this week? If you are not subscribed to this channel, as soon as I hit 100,000 subscribers, I get to have a review by YouTube, and then we can undo what has been shadow bans and all sorts of stuff, especially now that I've predicted so much and it may not be against the goals. So can you help me get to 100,000 subscribers so that we can get to the next stage? Just 1,000 to go. We can do that with this video, and hopefully next week we'll be celebrating together. I also cover this on X, so we live stream on X. And on X, I'm at 199,000 followers. Can we get another 1,000 there where I cover in real time all sorts of updates and all sorts? If I get banned from all of that because of my content, don't worry. I'm going to put it also on Rumble. Follow me over there. And in case all of that goes wrong, go to simondixon.com and create a free membership for yourself to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. I'll give you guides to the Great Depression of the 2020s, all completely free. A digital copy of my book, newsletter every week to keep you up to date. And we back up every video so you can go through the whole archives in case we get shut down of those systems. So make sure you follow all of that, do that as well. And we'll put the links below, and maybe even join me in the Telegram group in case we need some cryptic communications as well. So all of that is how to stay in touch. And we're going to move over now to part 2. I'm going to rescue my voice a little bit. While I'm doing that, please hit the like button. Please do some of that. Please put a comment below. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 86, this week in macro. In part 1, we covered the Iranian exchange. We covered the relationship between Justin Sun and the Trump administration. And we covered the Genius Act that's going to lead to reform in the banking system based upon the Stablecoin Bill. In part 2, we're going to be covering what the market is saying about the current geopolitical environment. Are we moving to World War III? Or is this the theater that I've been talking about in previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk? What do we do in order to make our analysis? We follow the money. We don't listen to the media, and we certainly don't listen to the politicians. We follow the money to find out what people are doing with their money because the market tends to know best. And the market is telling us that the US is not likely to join this action. And if they do join it, it will be a limited, predetermined outcome. I'll cover more on that in part 3 in geopolitics, but it's certainly not telling us we're moving to World War III. Right. So leading up to this recent conflict, looking down into the micro section, I went through all the different stocks that have exposure and heavy exposure to Middle East. And they've basically been going up steadily over the last few weeks leading up to this event. So the market was really not factoring in that this is going to be a major problem. It's not going to be leading to World War II. But if you're listening to the media, it sounds like the world is going to end. And you can even go into different factions. If you follow me on X, I've been contributing in real time. I mean, that's why I've got a bad throat. I've been giving so much content in real time around everything that's happening. You know, all the bits with the media blackout, everything they're hiding from you, completely different. And we've been covering, you know, what's really happening if you're not in the West. And then other spaces have just been covering Fox News and CNN and all of the propaganda to make you believe that, this is a precision operation. From Israel, from, you know, the crazy people that, so you can get those two different narratives. But if you follow me, and even within my spaces, most people completely disagree with me around what's coming next. I'll cover more on that in part 3, and I covered it last week as well. And I'll tell you everything that happened this week that makes me double down on my belief. I'm kind of on my own at the moment in terms of what this actually is and what the outcome will be. But I believe that from following the money, is correct. So let's have a look into the macro section. Basically, the macro is not reacting much to this theater. The market's kind of continuing as if nothing big is happening here. The market does not believe that this is war. This is basically, from my analysis, a conflict that does two things. And I've covered this in previous episodes and in the geopolitical section. This operation and this theater that we're watching right now, while it is real, it is degrading basically Iran and Israel's credibility. It is degrading infrastructure in a predetermined outcome, and it is executing the result of these negotiations. So remember when I said the tariff policy, when we covered all the tariff stuff, I told you what the outcome would be before it actually happened, and that actually happened. It was a resetting of the world order. It's not over yet, but I told you this is not a live trade war. This is the execution of the fact that China had already won the trade war with the US, and Trump was installed in order to execute the tariff policy, to execute the desired income. This is the same here. The outcome has been going through multi-years of negotiation based upon game theory, and this is the execution of the outcome. It is not a live outcome that isn't predetermined. And I give my case for that, and I've been given reason for that. So it degrades credibility based upon power dynamics in the region and where everything is. And it also cleans out the field for basically Gulf-led regional power. And so rather than the Middle East being colonized by US, it is now going to be Gulf-led, which means that whatever you think about the Gulf countries, the Saudi, the Qataris, the Emiratis, you're being essentially with your neighbors. So even if you don't like them, you have to get along, which is significantly different from being colonized by the US. But this paves the way for that. Now, that's my baseline theory of what we're witnessing, based upon geopolitics, macro, and various other factors. But what is the macro market actually saying, and what is the micro stocks and various other commodities saying? So I had a little bit of a look. So the first strike happened while we were live last Friday. It was Friday the 13th of are we June or July? I can't even remember where we are now. Are we in June? I think we're in June. July? Yeah, I think we're in June. I mean, time just goes so fast. Halfway through the year. Unbelievable. So it was Friday the 13th, and the escalation happened. I'm not going to go through that right now because we'll cover more on what happened this week in the geopolitical section. And today is the 20th. So we've had 1 week. Friday to Friday. And what happened in that week? Well, the key stocks that I would look at is the military industrial complex. The leader of the military industrial complex, the one to look at most, is Lockheed Martin. And so while there were big corrections and there was a lot of volatility in between, because there was alleged F-35 fighter jets that were shot down. And if they are, that's not a good look for Lockheed Martin and various other military companies. But overall, Lockheed Martin gained about 12% since the outbreak. So between last Friday and this Friday, about 12%. Now, that's not that much. It's a strong bounce. It's a decent bounce. It's relative to the rest of the market. But if we were in some kind of event that was anticipating world war, continual conflict, you'd expect a bigger reaction leading up to this and during that time. This is not pricing in like fresh munition orders, lots of military orders into some kind of World War III type of event. So the market doesn't really think that in terms of how it's moved. It's a measured move. It's not really, parabolic. And so the market really expects sustained more of the same, but controlled demand for munitions. So that's the military industrial complex. We could go deeper, but it's a bit, I just want to give you the point. The second, obviously, is oil and companies like ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil, it was up marginally. It was up about 0.8%. Since the Iran-Israel conflict began last Friday. And what else? Oil, Brent crude oil, is approximately up 4.3% in the last 7 days, so the same period. This is saying that there is no expectation that we're going to see something like the Strait of Hormuz, which is the choke point that is being threatened in this conflict to be shut down. The market doesn't believe that. The market doesn't believe that will be that level of disruption. And that is the type of thing that would lead to an escalation to direct conflict between the US, Gulf, Iran, destabilize the whole region, economic consequences, and a potential towards World War III as well. So there is no supply crisis. It's not pricing that into it at all. Just to give you an idea, about 20% of global oil passes through that choke point, which is 100% dependent upon harmony between Iran, the GCC, Asia, the other neighbors as well. It basically leads to around about 17 million barrels of oil per day goes through that choke point. It is the world's most important oil transit choke point in the world. And so you would expect, if that were to happen, prices around $120, $200 or more. It would be systemic. It would be inflationary. It would be disaster. It would be in the middle of trade routes. It would disrupt flows to, because it comes out, the flows basically come out of Saudi Arabia. They come out of Iraq. They come out of Kuwait. They come out of UAE. They come out of Iran. And also remember that Iran dependent upon those for imports as well. So they'd have to do it as a one-way shutdown. So the market isn't seeing this as a credible threat, despite the media making sure that you're scared that something like that is going to happen. It is also vital for liquefied natural gas, LNG, which powers electricity. And those exports are vital for a more and more electricity generated world with artificial intelligence and various other technologies that we're moving. And that is particularly for Qatar. Qatar has the highest GDP per capita in the world based upon its small population that has vast LNG, which is exported globally and exported particularly to that. For that reason, this port is protected by Western powers as well, like NATO. It is also protected by the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, because they need to make sure that they have protection. It is also protected by certain Asian powers as well, like India and Japan. And so they all monitor the area and they all have naval fleets and security there as well. Now, if it were to shut down, the exports that go through that point go towards China, go towards India, go towards Japan, go towards South Korea. Japan is the largest holder of US treasuries by a foreign country. China has been selling them off. Japan is in lead, with the exception of Cayman Island. Cayman Island just represents, it could be global, it could be internal, it could just be BlackRock funds, pensions, insurance, endowments, all sorts of stuff. And so Japan is engaged in a trade war battle with the administration. And so therefore, this could turn everything into chaos if this ever were to happen, which is related to the tariff policies, which is related to this conflict. The market is not expecting any of that. So what do we look at? We look at some of the shipping companies. So I was looking at Zim Shipping, for example. So in the last week, Zim Shipping basically experienced a modest uplift of about 4%. So it's not expecting that type of disruption. This is kind of profitable disruption at the same time, where they can charge higher prices as a result, but not a panic disruption where business shuts down. This is kind of a planned monetization of the disruption. And the fact that oil prices, is increasing as well is kind of oil price tension, because that is one of the important routes as well. But it's definitely not full-blown crisis like a straight shutdown or anything like that. And so the markets on the micro side is telling us that this war is controlled. And really plays into what I think I've been saying in terms of following the geopolitical section, that this is engineered mutual degradation. Prior Iran, now there was also evidence as well, because prior to this, there was a real prior exports were at their record high from Iran. That implies that China, Japan, South Korea, the key partners, particularly China that heads up BRICS, kind of knew that something was going to happen, and therefore they were making sure that they're ready for this. So imports hit their record high to China, implying that they knew ahead of this, which means that the outcome is potentially known, because the first strike was from Israel. And so if Israel knew, and Iran knew, and China was preparing ahead of this, it kind of all plays into, when you follow the money, the same type of narrative, that this is a controlled reset of the world order, just like tariff policy was a controlled reset of the world order in order to meet the key strategic goals of the power dynamics of the region as well. Just as well, in case you don't know, China can basically make up for any of the restrictions from Iran, because it's been stockpiling and it's been preparing for this event as well. Also, during this whole event, the whole time, Saudi was essentially remaining very, very neutral. It doesn't want to be seen, as favoring Iran or favoring US, but it's also, his public rhetoric has been favoring Iran, reiterating that there is unity in the region, and everybody in the region, with the exception of Israel, has already bought into the controlled outcome here. So is Israel disrupting the agreed outcome, or is Israel and Iran executing the agreed outcome? I say executing the agreed outcome, and the monetary flows are telling me that that's exactly what's happening as well. Remember also, because the Strait has NATO forces as well, this plays into Russia's interest. So any Russian negotiations, they won't allow this type of, extra forces from US into the Caspian Sea, because the US doesn't control those power dynamics anymore. We are not in the world order where, before just after the fall of the Soviet Union, where America had all the power and it can just do whatever it wants. Also, remember what we look at in the macro section. We look at the yields on bonds from government. From the US government, the 10-year and 30-year bonds, those auctions have been fine. They've all been going through, but there is a little bit of trickery to hide distress as well. And that is that the size of the auctions has been smaller and smaller and smaller. So when the US is auctioning off its debt to roll over the $10 trillion that it needs to roll over, and it does some every month, it has been selling them out, which has been, leading to these slow higher rates because people are seeing the US government as more risky to lend to. But they don't want a situation where the auction can't sell out. So they're making the auction smaller and smaller and smaller. But also the highest foreign buyer of those assets is not Japan, it's not China, it's not UK, it's not some of the other foreign nations, it's Cayman Islands. Cayman Islands means that these are shell companies for US rolling over and buying its own debt. And it is internal buyers. So the quality of who's buying the debt is decreasing. The amount that's being auctioned off is decreasing. And the rates at which the US government is paying for their 10, 30 years is increasing. And so while this debt is being rolled over, the market basically said that World War III isn't coming because US has its own issues and US can't afford to do this anymore. It is the strategic retreat to the multipolar world that the money and the market is telling us. At the same time, US announced some of its retail sales. Retail sales are down 0.9%. This was expected because of the initial spike in sales as a result of tariffs from Liberation Day on April the 2nd. But the expected rate was it was going to be down 0.6%. So this is worse than expected in terms of retail sales. Nothing major to look at right now. Consumption in the US is okay. Inflation in the US is okay. But we are continuing down this path of the debt is the most crazy thing. All of the theater around saving money and paying down the debt. Remember, I said it's impossible. The dollar is backed by debt. You can't change that through tax reform. You can only change that through monetary reform. Okay, excuse me. I told you my voice would be getting worse as I go through this. I've been doing so much talking with the outbreak of the Israel-Iran war and the conflict that my voice has been going. But I said the show must go on, so bear with me. I'll keep taking water as we progress. Okay, as I said, sales is likely to be down after, because this is the post-tariff world, and we don't know the impact of those so far. Is it going to be demand destruction because of higher prices? Is it going to be inflationary? Well, if we carry on the path that Trump is trying to take us down, and I'll cover more about that in a bit, then while inflation is correcting right now, you're going to be expecting a return to inflation based upon the different trends that are happening. And throughout this whole thing, there was an announcement that the pipeline that was being negotiated between Russia and China in order for natural gas, LNG, China originally didn't want to become like Europe, where it's fully dependent upon Russia, which is why China wants to make sure Iran survives this and its partnerships with Qatar and the region are stable, because it wants to invest in the Middle East, do more Belt and Road initiatives. It wants to ensure that there's a stability in the region. But it has now accelerated its building of the gas pipeline between China and Russia, and they put a notice out to accelerate negotiations to get this signed off, sealed. And so the power of Siberia 2 is back on track and being accelerated by China, which is why we're moving more and more into this multipolar world. BRICS is actually having a major impact, especially in the Middle East, based upon the GCC regions partnering with BRICS and ushering in this multipolar world, which is why we're seeing this decolonization and the macro and micro impacts of that as well. And this is the final conflict to usher in this new multipolar world order where the GCC governs itself and we have US strategically retreating as well. Okay, we're seeing the GCC more pro-Iran than we have ever seen before. Before, this would be kind of rhetoric favoring the West, favoring with Israel. publicly. There is more unification, and we're seeing that throughout this as well. Right. This week, we had the Federal Reserve, the FOMC meeting, where essentially the banks, the head of the 12 units of the regional central banks meet and in order to set rates. As expected, there's no Fed rate cut. And Trump came out and had a conference and obviously was pushing massive rhetoric, saying that Trump, trying to blame everything that's happening upon Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is just middle management. He works for the banks, the same banks that Trump essentially works for in the proof of weapons network. So that's all theater. He wants those rates to come down. Now, what does that mean? What can we interpret between that? So in Trump's speech, he was giving all sorts of criticisms of the Fed, saying the Fed's killing the economy, so that what happens next can obviously be blamed on the Fed from the Trump side. That's his exit strategy for what we're seeing. But he was requesting the Fed to cut by 200 basis points, even 250 basis points. Excuse me. Why is he doing that? Well, what he seems to want to do is get the short-term interest rate down so that he can borrow, because the 10-year and 30-year borrowing rate is going up. And no matter what you do with the short-term rate, is pushing the long-term rate up further. That is extreme concern of the market saying we're more and more concerned. This is like, a distressed third world distressed company that's has massive IMF debt. This is what the market's saying. And so he's asking the Federal Reserve to manipulate the market, push the rates down lower and lower and lower, so that he can essentially sell short-term debt. So you can roll over with 1 month, 2 months, 3 weeks, 3 months, and can borrow at a cheaper rate because the short-term rate is cheaper. If you're going to lend money to the government for a longer term, you're going to want to be compensated with a higher rate. But he's looking to roll it over short-term, which is exactly what a distressed country would do. They would try, and the only lenders would be the short-term ones. They'll try and do it at a lower rate. And this is essentially a distressed country strategy. Now, what's the implication of that? By doing it all at the shorter and shorter term rate, you're increasing the rate that you need to borrow as you're rolling over the debt. This is more and more inflationary pressure. So we have been in a trend since the shock of the COVID, 9 to 10% rates, down to the rates where we're between 2 and 3%, and we're starting to see a return to that. So if you end up restricting immigration, inflationary, restricting, going for the tariff policy to rebuild the manufacturing base, inflationary, and rolling over with short-term debt, inflationary. And at the moment, it is now interest on the debt is the largest item on the balance sheet. It's going to 1.2 trillion, 1.3 trillion is now larger than defense. So it is going into a debt distressed country type of things. Every credit rating agency has now downgraded US debt. And every time you may get a shorter date rollover, the market is increasing the rates and the dollar is being weakened. Now, it hasn't come down to its all-time lows, but the DXY, the price of the dollar, priced with other currencies, is still below that 100 mark. It had a little bit of a spike in the last week and then started to come back down again, and the market is not believing it. So you're getting a weakening dollar, which seems to be the strategy, at the same time as rolling over debt on the short term, which means all roads return to, a return to inflation all over again as the strategy. This does not impact mortgages. This does not impact real estate, because remember, mortgages are based upon the longer term debt, not the short term debt. So the Federal Reserve can't control in this moment. So even if they reduce rates and did what Trump said, the only impact would be they'd be able to roll over the Ponzi scheme just for a month, 2 months, 3 months. but the long-term rates will go up, which means mortgage rates go up, which implies distress as well. So this is all about, it's basically signaling to the world that lending to the US government is a distressed asset relative to what it is. And this is why we started to see essentially an environment of what may lead to a return to QE to infinity, and everything he promised is not happening, which is consistent with the Big Beautiful Bill. And the Big Beautiful Bill is pushing for an increase in the debt ceiling to $5 trillion. And what's being negotiated? The ushering in of the surveillance state with Palantir and a massive transfer of wealth from Main Street over to Wall Street and the military industrial complex. Nothing stops this train. It doesn't matter who's in charge. Whoever's in charge, left, right, Republican, Democrat, taking on the deep state, being a part of the deep state, they all work for the same parties. And so that is what it looks like it's going. And if the Fed or the deep state wants to actually turn America into real distress, then they can just not do QE, reset the world order. It would have massive implications, and then return to having America just as a host nation for its capital markets, for its stock market, as it does to the American people what the European Central Bank has been doing to the Europeans and the Bank of England has been doing to the Brits. Engineering civil unrest, I covered it in deep detail last week, and basically asset strip the American people, asset strip the British people, and asset strip the Europeans in order to transfer wealth. And a weakening dollar implies that you have capital outflows and you start investing in other countries as well, while America starts to become more insulated, pushing us to this multipolar world. Now, Jerome Powell is not doing it at the moment, but he is only going to be in charge for approximately another 6 months. So we covered this last week, that we're going to likely move to where someone like Scott Bessent or someone where the Trump administration installs their own in order to push down those lower term interest rates, push up the higher term ones, and then he can roll it over with his own stable coin, and he can install his own Fed chair that will essentially push those rates down. Currently, the current Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell is forecasting about half a point of rate cuts this year. Essentially, this is payday financing. This is the government rolling over their debt with short-term debt, which is kind of like a payday rollover. This will push up assets and benefit the wealthy, but the Federal Reserve's, basically some of the other people in the Federal Reserve, they started to make some noise around what they are likely to do. Christopher Wooler, he came out and publicly said that they could cut rates as early as the July meeting. So we may start to enter into that rate cutting cycle to push to inflationary cycle as well. So in summary, everything we're seeing right now is that the US is in no position to join this war. It could have a complete death spiral. It could have a debt spiral. And the US essentially is not in charge of its debt right now. And this is consistent with the fact that what we're seeing on the war side is the engineered, agreed outcome, and tariffs were a strategic retreat of the US. And therefore, the GCC is taking over the region, and BRICS is in charge of their own region. And we're moving to this multipolar world order. Bullish for the Middle East, bullish for the global South, bullish for the rich people in America that have assets, bearish for everyone else, more civil unrest, more degradation of infrastructure, and more vassalizing the West for the military industrial complex, the blanks, the technocrats as well. So Trump is really not able to deliver on any of his promise, but he needs to keep pushing a narrative that this is MAGA, and he's going to make America great again. How's he going to do it? Take credit for peace in the Middle East, which is another indicator. I've covered that earlier last week, and I'll cover that a bit more in part 3. Even though he won't take peace in the Middle East, push towards a war make everyone freak out. And then when the actual outcome happens, Trump will take credit for it, which will rebuild his base, get him through the next phase while they asset strip the average American and they start to think that something's happening here. And he can use his stable coins, in order to accumulate more Bitcoin at the expense of the American people. The monetary side is showing all of that flows. That was covered more in part 1 if you didn't watch This Week in Bitcoin. And so in the macro side, it is consistent with everything else I'm seeing on the Bitcoin side that what we are witnessing between Iran and Israel is pre-agreed outcome and the engineering of what I'm going to be covering in part 3 and what I've been covering all along, that this is a resetting of the world order. The outcome is known. US won't join. If US does join, it will be on a pre-agreed basis, which I don't think will be at all. And it will lead to a de-escalation to de-escalate, no World War III, negotiations, and countries having their relative narratives that they can take back to their people in order for all parties to think, we won, we got what we wanted. So with that in mind, we're going to be moving over now to part 3, This Week in Geopolitics. And in this week, we're going to be showing you exactly everything that happened with the escalation between Israel and Iran and why the geopolitical side, what I want to help you interpret what I'm seeing that nobody else is seeing. And this may be my biggest epic failure call of history. I think I'm right, but nobody agrees with me. Everybody thinks that Israel controls the world and is moving the world to World War III. I'm going to be covering that, and I'm going to be saying why power dynamics are changing. Make sure you're following the geopolitical section because you may be caught off guard when you follow the money. Okay. So just before we move over to part 3, if you are not a subscriber to my channel, please subscribe right now. We have over 99,000 subscribers. Once we get to 100,000 subscribers, thank you so much. Everybody that is listening, and make sure you hit the subscribe button, the bell symbol, all. Then YouTube's going to give me a review and we can make sure we get this message out to more people so more people aren't fooled by narrative of media and have the real information by following the money, build their skills and get to protect them in this rapidly changing world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. I want them protecting their freedom that CBDCs will take away. I want them protecting and armed and ready with economic power when AI takes their job away. And I want them to have it in self-custody so that they can boycott the system and they can come out the other side of this transition that is the most disruptive thing that we're all going to live through. So in case YouTube shuts us down, I also stream on X. And on X, I'm on about 199,000 followers. Let's get it over to 200,000. And if you're over there and follow me, I cover my real days. If you do follow me, unfollow me and refollow me, but put all there because I was shadow banned with all the content I was given. And some people were saying when they refollowed me and put all for notifications, the shadow ban disappeared. So feel free to do that. And in case that doesn't work, we're streaming on Rumble. Follow me over there. I've got a small following, but it's building. Thank you for all coming over because that was censorless. And in case all goes wrong, get a free login at simondixon.com. Get the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal login. All the backups will be there and content that you can't get anywhere else, including the old video series on the Great Depression of the 2020s to prepare for everything that's coming next. Right. So with that in mind, I'm going to get my last bit of water. My voice is going down and down and down because I've been covering so much content over on X. But I think I've got one final push in part 3. We're going to be doing This Week in Geopolitics, and we're going to break down into detail what happened this week, what it actually means, and what is the likely next outcome, and how to not fall for all the headlines that are designed to distress you and get the wrong side of the story. So I'm going to have a little bit of water and then I'm going to join you back in part 3, This Week in Geopolitics. Okay, welcome to part 3, This Week in Geopolitics. I've got a video lined up for you. It's about 11 minutes and I'm going to cover the video because I want you to have the background in terms of the monetary reasons why Iran and Israel are in a conflict right now. They're going to tell you that this is all about Iran was developing a nuclear bomb and they were about to bomb all of the Jews because they want to kill the Jews and they want death to America, death to Israel. And they're pushing that narrative. And then they're going to say, what are they saying in the United Nations right now? Iran is developing a nuke that can go all the way to London, all the way to Germany. And apparently we're about to be nuclearized in order to take over the world and implement Sharia law by this big, evil, terrorist, jihadi monster that is taking over the world with nukes. And those nukes are a threat to society. And he is going to take over the Muslimic world, and the Islam is going to become to all of you. And he has been responsible for assassinating Trump. And he's responsible for these open borders. And ISIS comes through and they want to take away your freedom and take away your twin towers and take over the whole world. And therefore you must sign up to Palantir and agree to a full surveillance state. And you must agree to go into a war and have hyperinflation and hand over all your money, give up all your freedoms, and make sure that you are accepting that we're going to spend trillions of dollars in order to make money for the military industrial complex so the proof of weapons network can steal more money from you and they can terrorize more countries and they can use organizations like USAID in order to Western-backed funding. Western-backed militias like ISIS and Al-Qaeda can perpetuate this narrative that you have a boogie monster that is not real. The whole thing is fiction. If you read any of the books that I recommend on my reading list, Covert Regime Change, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, what else have we got? Operation Gladio. The boogie monsters were all funded by the West. Now, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Well, guess what? It's because British Petroleum needed some oil. And when the Iranians wanted to nationalize their oil, they had a big problem. And when the Iranians wouldn't allow for a Western central bank to colonize their country because they believe in Islamic finance, which prohibits the use of interest in currency, then they weren't able to take it over, just like they did in Egypt, just like they did in Libya, just like they did in Lebanon, just like they did in Turkey, by weaponizing financial weapons and mass destruction. These are the tools of colonization, Western central banks, debt-based Ponzi scheme. The same thing that is leading to the debt crisis in the West is what they've always used in the Middle East, in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, in the global South. And Iran was the one that resisted against having their oil used for Western interests. They wanted to just sell it to people that wanted to buy it. And they wanted to use it for their people instead of taxing them. And they wanted their own banking system that didn't perpetuate a debt-based Ponzi scheme so they get taken over by the IMF. How dare they do that? And so obviously they needed regime change, CIA operations, and they needed to install boogie monsters so that they could then have this whole nuclear threat, when the nuclear threat and the illegal weapons of mass destruction were by already in the Middle East by the country Israel that was telling it, you need to go to war with Iraq. You need to go to war with Iran. You need to go to war with Libya. You need to go to war with Gaddafi, because they were just trying to create their own African currencies backed by gold, or they wanted to price their own oil in maybe euros or something else that didn't perpetuate the proof of weapons network. And therefore, they need to be eliminated. And you need to believe that you're exporting democracy and standing up for Western values, and you're perpetuating freedom, while at the same time, you don't have any freedom because they're ushering in a surveillance state through Patriot Act, and they're actually killing you through operations like 9/11 and various other engineered civil unrest that we've covered. So with that in mind, We're going to cover two things in part 3 this week in geopolitics. The first one, we're going to cover this 11-minute video. I'm going to give a bit of commentary. I've covered this, these CIA operations, but sometimes people like to see the declassified documents because sometimes people think I'm a conspiracy theorist, even though you can get all these documents on WikiLeaks, the CIA website, read the books. All of these so-called conspiracy theories are pretty well documented right now. Thank you, Julian Assange. You took the hit. Keir Starmer tried to take you out. You were saved by Bitcoin freedom money, freedom website, because we believe in freedom of speech. But the West doesn't. They're even right now in this conflict, they're taking out the media. They got a blackout. They're arresting people for posting what's happened in Israel because they don't want you to know. This is meant to be Western values. And when you share it on Telegram, what do? They arrest the founder of Telegram. They want you to not know what's happening. And that's why we have to share this and you have to share this and help me share this so we can get through. Right. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Azad right now to play the beginning part of the video. I'll probably break it into 3, give a bit of commentary, and then we're going to go into exactly what happened this week and how I know it is all theater and a beautiful outcome at the end of this, which I'm very excited for, despite all the crazy death and destruction that we have to go through in order to get the proof of weapons network out of the Middle East. So Azad, let's start with the video.
For 64 years, the CIA concealed the true story of what really happened in 1953 that transformed the Middle East forever. But in 2017, the intelligence agency finally declassified documents from that event. On August 19, 1953, a military coup overthrew the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. These actions led to the return of the Shah and created a pressure pot amongst the Iranian people that eventually resulted in the 1979 Iranian Revolution. The impact of this coup shapes not only the history of the Iranian people, it shapes Western foreign policy and alliances in the Middle East to this very day.
Iranians have long complained of a history of U.S. interference in their affairs and of America's role in overthrowing an Iranian government during the Cold War.
Most history books either vaguely mention or completely omit the story of Mossadegh and the coup of 1953. One can only wonder why. An event with such far-reaching consequences is hardly discussed in the context of Iran and the modern-day Middle Eastern peace process. However, decades later, we finally know why. This is the story of what really happened in Iran on August 19th, 1953. For most Americans and the West, the story of Iran begins in 1979, when Iranian students seized the US Embassy in Tehran. 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. The hostage crisis started when the US government refused to deport the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, back to Iran.
Good evening. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been invaded and occupied by Iranian students. The Americans inside have been taken prisoner, and according to a student spokesman, will be held as hostages until the deposed Shah is returned from the United States, where he's receiving medical treatment for cancer.
But to truly understand the hostage crisis, we have to go back almost 29 years to 1950.
In Abadan, the world's largest oil refinery has been handling each year 25 million tons of crude oil, fed by countless pipelines from the oil fields.
During this time, the British controlled the largest oil refinery in the world, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Based in Abadan in western Iran, the oil refinery was of great strategic importance, not only as a profit center for the British government, but also as a source of energy to run the mighty British Navy. The Navy had switched from coal to petroleum in 1911 under the leadership of then Navy Secretary Winston Churchill. So while the British were benefiting immensely from the oil in Iran, the Iranians were pretty unhappy. Well, because in exchange for extracting Iranian oil, the British government was paying Iranians less than 20% of the global profits. Furthermore, the Iranian government wasn't allowed to audit the company books nor have a voice in the company's management. In late December 1950, word got to Tehran that the Americans had made a deal with the Saudis, agreeing to a 50-50 profit sharing of the Arab American Oil Company, also known as Aramco. However, when a similar agreement was proposed by the Iranians, it was rejected by the UK Foreign Office. This led to increased turmoil in Iran. Many felt that Iran's oil fields should first and foremost benefit Iranians. One vocal advocate of this perspective was Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. On the 20th of April 1951, Mossadegh became the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran.
With chances of a settlement fading, the West's best hope is that this sickly man, in whose frail hands may lie the key to peace, is as anti-Russian as he is anti-British.
Born in 1882, he came from a prestigious Iranian family. His father, a finance minister of Iran, and his mother, a princess from the Qajar dynasty. Mossadegh became the first Iranian to receive a doctorate in law from a Western university and was often described as incorruptible, a man who didn't fear standing up to power. One of Mossadegh's first actions was to do what many people had been calling for years. On the 1st of May 1951, Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company.
Abadan, the world's largest oil refinery, which British enterprise and money built, may pass out of British control if Persia carries out the vote for nationalization passed by their parliament.
The British, as expected, were completely outraged. They felt that Mossadegh had effectively stolen their oil, even if it did exist under Iranian land. And they weren't going to back down from this fight. Apart from direct interest in the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, what the British really feared was the signal that it sent to other Middle Eastern countries that they had similar arrangements with, such as Egypt and its Suez Canal. The British debated taking over the oil refinery through a naval operation, but the Americans didn't support this. Instead, the US offered to negotiate with Mossadegh on behalf of the British. However, the parties were unable to reach an agreement. Shortly after, the British, who still operated their refinery, shut it down and evacuated all British personnel. The refinery was even sabotaged to prevent the Iranians from operating it. Without the green light from the US on a military operation, the British government decides to take their case to the United Nations and International Court of Justice at The Hague. However, much to their surprise, both judgments went in favor of Iran.
That if they continue, they may render it impossible to execute a judgment in favor of the United Kingdom.
Mossadegh emerged as a hero in his country and was propelled to international stardom. That year, the Times magazine named Mossadegh the Times Man of the Year, beating Churchill, who was also a contender. Options were running out for the British, so they initiated an embargo, preventing anyone from buying Iranian oil. The blockade decimated the Iranian economy. The British hoped that this would anger the Iranian people against Mossadegh, but to their surprise, it didn't. The 1950s was the beginning of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviets were pushing their ideological agenda across the globe, and Iran was no exception. There was a communist party in Iran called the Tudeh Party. Mossadegh, although not a communist, tolerated the Tudeh and felt that in a pluralistic democracy, people had the right to organize. What might have seemed like a pro-democracy stance was manipulated towards a pro-Soviet one. The British realized they could exploit this as a weakness. During President Truman's term, the United States was reluctant to involve itself in Iranian matters. The Truman administration felt that the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran reflected the values of the American people. In fact, Mossadegh and Truman had a great personal relationship. On July 21st, 1952, a power struggle emerged between the Shah and Mossadegh on who should control the military. Mossadegh demanded that he appoint the Minister of Defense. When the Shah refused, Mossadegh resigned, giving the British a prime opportunity to appoint a puppet prime minister in Iran. This appointment angered both Mossadegh supporters and the Tudeh Party, who joined forces in a protest against the Shah. Troops loyal to the Shah fired on the crowd, killing 67 people. 5 days later, Mossadegh returned to power as prime minister. Britain had completely run out of options. Rejecting the advice of the Truman administration, Britain planned to instigate a military coup. They looked towards General Zahedi, a man loyal to the Shah, to carry this out. Although he was a Nazi sympathizer and, according to British intelligence, untrustworthy, his raging anti-Mossadegh position made him the ideal candidate for the coup. Mossadegh got the news of what was happening and decided that his only option was to break diplomatic relations with the British. The embassy was shut down and all the British diplomats were kicked out. Everything changed when Dwight Eisenhower was elected as the President of the United States in January 1953. A meeting was arranged between Eisenhower and Churchill to discuss the Iran issue. The British knew that the Americans didn't really care about the British losing their oil fields, so instead, They made it look like the reason they wanted to get rid of Mossadegh was because he was a communist. And since the US were fighting communism around the world, this strategy worked.
Mr. Eisenhower arrived at the home of Mr. Bernard Baruch in New York for his long-awaited meeting with Mr. Churchill. In the house of the Premier's genial host, two old comrades of war and peace renewed their historic association before settling down to informal talks.
During this time, Mossadegh appointed Ashraf Dus as the chief of police, who was quite loyal to him. In the spring of 1953, Ashraf Dus was kidnapped and murdered under the direction of the MI6 operative Norman Derbyshire. His body was dumped publicly. This was to send a signal to the Iranian people that Mossadegh couldn't even protect his own chief of police. The final plot for the coup to take out Mossadegh was approved on July 11, 1953 by President Eisenhower and Prime Minister Churchill. It was codenamed Operation Ajax. The British and the American ambassadors of Iran went to the Shah to ask for his support for the coup against Mossadegh, but the Shah refused. So instead, they went to his twin sister Ashraf and bribed her to convince the Shah. She flew to Tehran to deliver the letter from the British and the Americans. The letter was a request to dissolve the parliament and appoint the new prime minister of Britain's choosing. The plan was for Mossadegh to reject this direct order from the Shah, which would ultimately result in his arrest. Enter Kermit Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a CIA agent and also the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. He crossed into Iran via Iraq with suitcases full of cash and started buying off journalists and newspaper editors to print stories on anti-Mossadegh propaganda, stating that he was a communist. This was all in preparation for the coup, as well as to signal to the outside world that they were getting rid of him because he was a communist. Eventually, a junior officer in the Royal Guard leaked the plans of the coup to Mossadegh. At midnight on the 16th of August 1953, the army sent tanks and officers to the Prime Minister's house. However, Mossadegh was prepared. As soon as the Royal Guards presented the letter from the Shah, they were arrested by Mossadegh's guards. The coup had failed miserably, and the Shah fled to Rome. The people cheered that the Shah had left. The US accepted the outcome and asked for Operation Ajax to be discontinued. Kermit Roosevelt was ready to leave, but Norman Derbyshire from the MI6 convinced him otherwise. Derbyshire had paid mercenaries to pretend to be Mossadegh and two-day communist supporters. They started rioting in the streets, pulling down statues of the Shah.
As anti-royalist partisans, supporters of the aged Dr. Mossadegh, set about their work of destruction. Target on which much bitter feeling was focused was the statue of the Shah's father.
This was used as a way to manipulate the narrative across the world that it was in fact Mossadegh that staged the coup against the Shah, not the other way around. Of course, this was false. On the morning of 19th August, 1953, this same mercenary mob funded by the CIA and the MI6 came onto the streets once again, but this time showing pro-Shah sentiments. They began destroying shops, burning offices, and attacking pro-Mossadegh supporters. They began shouting, "Death to Mossadegh! Long live the Shah!" At 4:30 p.m. on the 19th of August, 1953, 28 tanks attacked Mossadegh's house. At this point, Mossadegh asked all his ministers to leave his house, as he wanted to die there alone. But the ministers insisted that he leave with them, or they'd all stay and die with him. He agreed and left. Later that day, General Zaidi was sworn in as prime minister on the orders of the Shah. The coup finally worked. The Shah returned to Iran on the 22nd of August, 1953. With $45 million from US aid, the Shah neutralized the opposition supporters, and Mossadegh was convicted for treason.
Backed by General Zahedi, military strongman who engineered his return to power. The general will now have a strong voice in the newly formed government, whose cabinet has seen him with Shah Pahlavi.
Any officers associated with the two-day party were all executed. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was renamed BP, and Iran was required to share their oil with several other European and American oil companies. Eventually, Mossadegh was shifted from the military prison to Ahmedabad in Iran under house arrest. Mossadegh spent the rest of his life living in total solitude. According to most accounts, Mossadegh was a true leader of the nation, an intellect, one of the most prestigious figures in modern Iranian history. A leader who believed that Iranian oil should be for the Iranian people, but a leader who was ultimately overthrown by the powers whose interests lied not with the will of the Iranian people, but rather in the resources and wealth of Iran. On March 5th, 1967, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh died due to complications with cancer. He was secretly buried in the living room of his home in Ahmedabad. In 1979, the Shah would ultimately flee the country again for the final time. The truth is, the seeds of the 1979 Iranian Revolution were sown in 1953. The betrayal of the US and the UK of the Iranian democracy forever severed the trust between Iran and the West. It will always remain a mystery. What if the US and the UK had not overthrown Iran's first democratically elected leader? Would the 1979 revolution ever happen? Would those Americans have been kidnapped in Tehran? Would Jimmy Carter have won a second term? Where would Iran be today? And what would the Middle East look like? I suppose we'll never know.
Beautiful documentary. I think it did a really good job. I wanted to play that all the way through. I didn't want to interrupt on that one. But I want you to understand, start to recognize the patterns. And if you think that this is something that only used to happen in the past, and that this isn't still happening right now, and all the techniques used in these covert operations in order to socially engineer your mind to thinking that the world is different to the world how it actually is not being used against you right now. The gig is up. The information is out. You have to be smarter. You have to follow the money. So what happened after 1979? All of a sudden, the CIA decided to fund Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein did an invasion into Iran while they funded the dirtiest, most disgusting crimes against humanity war that Iran has ever experienced. Chemical weapons were handed over to Saddam Hussein to inflict upon civilians while lots and lots of people died because they do not care. This is exactly what they do. They wanted to use Iraq and Saddam Hussein in order to weaken Iran so that they could get what they want. After 8 years of death, destruction, chemical warfare, and dirty, dirty tactics, Iran did not retreat. And so what happened next after that? They needed to have a new plan. And so we then had 9/11, which was a CIA Mossad operation in order to kill Americans and justify and radicalize Americans into thinking that they needed to go after more boogie monsters. And when they came after more boogie monsters, they decided that Saddam Hussein is somebody, earlier, that they do not need to work with anymore because he decided to fight back and he decided that he wanted to expand his oil aspirations. And I'm not saying any of these people are good. America prefers and Britain prefers bad people because when they want to get rid of them, they can blame all their badness and say that they're doing that for them and that they're trying to expand democracy. And it's because they really care about human rights and they really care about women's rights and they really care about women's rights not to wear hijab in Iran, but they really don't care about it if you do exactly what I say and give us the resources that we need. And that looks like either what happened in Saudi Arabia, where in order to comply with us, after colonization, after weaponization, after the same type of assassination attempts, family after family, time after time, you cooperate with us. And if you don't install a central bank that gives us all your money and all your resources, then maybe we'll just partner with you instead. And that's what's happened to some of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. They managed to keep their sovereignty by not having a Western central bank. And they had to just give a bunch of their resources in partnership so that they could remain and build wealth, sovereign wealth, so that eventually when America hits a debt-based Ponzi scheme and they're 125% debt to GDP and all the assets have been wiped out of all the people, they can actually say, well, we'll invest in your artificial intelligence and data centers. And we are now wealthy enough where we can buy you away and we can say, actually, why don't you, we can power some of our nuclear energy behind all of this. And now they have the power. And the ones that signed up to a central bank are basically Turkey, vassalized into NATO, Egypt, vassalized into the International Monetary Fund, Lebanon, that had to build a gold-backed peer-to-peer Islamic monetary system in order to combat the Lebanese central bank, but now has a puppet government installed. And Iran was the one that decided to resist. So it would fund resistant groups, whether it be Hezbollah in Lebanon after an Israeli invasion on behalf of its proxy US, on behalf of the military industrial complex that controls the CIA, not for country interest, but actually for corporate interest as well. Start to get the picture of how this proof of weapons network works. And so then you would use their organizations like USAID, and anytime there was a resistance, like, for example, Hamas in Gaza, or you would have, any type of resistance group like Houthis in Yemen, then what do? You need control over routes that allow you to invade Iran. And what is the country you need to control? That country is Syria. And so what do? You take a country that's doing incredibly well and you create a civil war, and you create and fund a group called Muslim Brotherhood, and you use civil unrest in order to install your own government or your own people within Egypt or your own people within all of these countries that were affected. You take countries like Libya and you steal their gold, take over their resources, assassinate their presidents that wanted to get any type of freedom, like Gaddafi. And when he went to United Nations and said, by the way, you know who killed JFK? It was actually Israel, to try and get the illegal nuke, the weapon of mass destruction. And Netanyahu comes to Congress and said, they've got the weapon of mass destruction. They've got the weapon of mass destruction. They got the weapon of mass destruction. What are they saying to you today? They've got the weapon of mass destruction, and therefore we need to take out Iran and go to war. You're hearing this story time and time again, and most people are falling for it over again. What did they need in order to attack Iran? They needed Syria. Okay, so what do? We take Assad and we give chemical weapons. And although Assad, when you sanction a country and you have people that are willing to be paranoid, and when they're paranoid and you have all these insurrections and CIA agents, you tend to have an army that's corrupt to try and circumvent the sanctions. And they have to engage in criminal activity to circumvent the sanctions. And you probably violate human rights all the time because you're paranoid about the insurrections that are coming. And then you can just say, when you install the white helmets, like a MI6 operation that was firing those chemical weapons upon the civilians, you can raffle people up by building an army like ISIS, Western-backed militia. And that ISIS can come along and start killing. Muslims started killing all the other Muslims. And then you say they're the Sunnis and they're the Shias. And then you have someone like Qasem Soleimani, which worked with IRGC in Iran. And why did he need to be assassinated by Trump? Because he was killing ISIS. He was known as the ISIS slayer. He was responsible for killing more ISIS CIA operatives and Mossad operatives than anyone else. So Trump comes along and says, we'll take out Qasem Soleimani and we'll pretend that we're taking down ISIS. I eliminated ISIS. Go to WikiLeaks, put in ISIS. Julian Assange will tell you with the Hillary Clinton email leaks that America controls Al-Qaeda, the same one that took down Twin Towers, the same agent, And so when you have all of this, you create civil unrest within Syria. Eventually, you get it to the point where you can divide and conquer. You can enter into a negotiation. And because all the other people in the region are trying to find out, you've got this strategic tension between Israel, which is a proxy for the military industrial complex. You've got Iran that is funding resistance against that. And you've got countries like the GCC countries that are partnering in order to try and build economic power to buy away their freedom. And eventually, America and its debt-based Ponzi scheme turns on itself. Saudi and UAE and Qatar end up with a bunch of sovereign wealth. And eventually you find yourself in a scenario where you no longer need the resistance because finally, as a community, as a group, as a region, you partnered with a rising power like China and Russia and BRICS that were able to stand against the colonizers of the US dollar that was raping, pillaging, and stealing resources. And you actually get to resist October the 7th against the colonizers, recruit people pretending this is religious warfare, and then they use atrocity propaganda. Remember, go to my blog, Atrocity Inc., that goes through all the lies on October the 7th, and you make people believe in the atrocity of the 40 beheaded babies, that this is something completely different to what it actually is. Then you play a game like that, and the West are no longer in a position to be able to fool you, because the resistance comes back, and eventually you negotiate your freedom, you negotiate decolonization, and the military industrial complex agrees we're no longer going to profit from these forever wars. We're no longer going to print fake GDP. We're going to do it in Europe instead. And so now there's trillions of dollars for the military to make, because the state and the military that control the region are now doing it in Europe. The same techniques that were used in the Middle East are being used on you. The same techniques of colored revolutions, funding dissent and civil unrest by open borders, mass deportations, and Palantir surveillance technology that was beta tested in Gaza with occupation as a service and genocide as a service, and integrated with AI-powered drones in Ukraine in order to get those rare earth minerals. They're now being used on you with one big, beautiful bill integrated into Trump's stablecoin and Elon's stablecoin, because they're giving you freedom of speech without freedom of reach, so that they can create algorithms to build your social credit score, so that this can all be integrated into one beautiful big bill. You still think Trump's fighting the deep state, or he's getting rich out of engineering the corporate agenda that control the politicians? And there is no difference here. So the theater continues. And that is why I believe, when you follow the money and go through all the different things, that right now what you are witnessing is the final part of the execution of a negotiation, rather than genuinely. Now, that doesn't mean that this is pretend strikes and nothing's real. Everything is real. Remember, military profit from dropping bombs. And if you want to use Iran and Israel to deplete your assets and deplete your resources, then you can get them to fight each other, take out the strategic targets, and in the end, you end up with the negotiated solution. It's the best movie I've actually ever watched. And everybody is following the headlines and thinking that this is leading to World War III, and Trump is about to put the troops into Israel, because they're pretending and using their plausible deniability story that Israel controls America, when this is simply a vassal of the military industrial complex. And this is the policy to prop up the dollar, to steal money from the American people in a proof of weapons network through inflation and a debt-based Ponzi scheme, so that they can justify the breakup when it all breaks down and say it wasn't us doing that genocide thing. We're the good people. It wasn't us. We were blackmailed. It was Jeffrey Epstein that blackmailed us and forced us to do it. Definitely wasn't us. It was them. And this engineers the breakup, which is why now suddenly you're starting to find the documents that strategically weaken Israel as a jurisdiction, because it's no longer an asset, it's an absolute liability, because the gig is up. Everybody figured it out. And we covered it all the way on Bitcoin Hard Talk. And you thought that we were, that the whole thing was something completely different to what it is. So I would like to describe what happened this week and what is happening in real time from the perspective of following the money and the likely outcome. I covered it last week in detail from last week's perspective. And I was thinking that it was going to be a limited, proportional escalation, but I'm seeing the whole operation is being escalated through this conflict. So everything is real, but I believe that the outcome has been completely negotiated and agreed, and it is the best way to get to the outcome, which I'm very bullish about, and actually ends the damn genocide that we've been watching in real time for 650 days. And it still goes on today. This is what backs up the dollar, people. This is what backs up the euro. This is what backs up the pound. They can't possibly let you know that, so they have to engineer a plausible deniability story so that they can exit from that as well. The end result is a significantly better outcome for all, and all of the trigger events and things that need to happen in order to get to the outcome that is needed without you knowing it. And most people will never know. Only people that follow Bitcoin Hard Talk, or people that actually read the history books in the future of the American Empire, which was just as bad as the British Empire, but they never told you the true story of what was happening because they had all these boogie monsters to blame everything onto as well. So what did we happen after Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 85? During the live, we had the initial strikes. And at the same time, Trump was in a G7 meeting in Canada. Suddenly he said that he needed to leave earlier. He needed to leave early because, creating all of the belief that America was about to join the war. And all the Americans were up in frenzy, going crazy, thinking that Israel's about to get us into World War III, and Israel's going to end America. And this evil Israel is doing everything, even though they're all part of the same team, work for the same banks, work for the same military. But it is seeing something. So immediately we saw a preemptive strike on Iran. And what did they say? Weapons of mass destruction. Iran was about to blow us up, and the IAEA, the nuclear inspection organization, was the excuse that they used, saying that they were about to blow up and kill all the Jews in Israel. Now, what also happened is simultaneously there was a hack that revealed something called the Samson option. The Samson option, which made its way on alternative media, which was said that it was an Iranian hack, but probably released strategically, explained that Israel had nukes. And if you followed any of my content on JFK, you'll know that they were JFK was assassinated in order to get those nukes there, and they had something called the Samson option. The Samson option means that if Israel is under threat, then Israel apparently has nukes pointed at Europe, London, New York, Washington, D.C., all around the world. The very same thing that the Israeli United Nations rep is saying in United Nations today that Iran is doing is what is in the Samson option as documented evidence that they have a nuke that is pointed at Europe and pointed at America. Now, what does this do? It basically allows you to push the narrative that Iran is about to do it. And when you're ready to dump Israel and denuclearize Israel, you have the narrative that allows for that, because it turns out that every accusation was a confession. And this crazy Israel was doing it when it was America doing it to its own people anyway. And when I say America, I don't mean the American people, and I don't mean the American government. I mean the military-industrial complex. You've seen how the proof of weapons network. Watch some of my previous videos on understanding the proof of weapons network. I'll cover it again in a bit more detail as we go through future episodes as well when I want to, but make sure you understand that. And so we're told that Iran was caught off guard. That was the traditional story. This was like their Pearl Harbor moment. Tucker Carlson came out and he was like, this is our Pearl Harbor moment. Everyone was like, America's about to go to war. America's about to war. This is World War III, World War III, World War III. Everyone was panicking across all the spaces. Everyone told me, well, I think this outcome is orchestrated. They're like, Simon, you're crazy. Nobody is on, like, I'm literally on my own on both sides on this one. I'm a conspiracy theorist. Can't possibly be. But suddenly, Iran recovered better than expected. And now Iran has basically launched about, at the time of this recording, about 18 tit for tat. So we've had immediately the relevant people, the hardliners at the IRGC were taken out by Israel. And then we've had the strategic weakening. We've had Iran hitting illegal settlements. And remember, in Israel, they have bunkers. So the civilians can go underneath. This is targeting billions, bricks and, buildings, bricks and mortar. We're not the genocidal maniacs that have been doing the genocide on the 650 days now, killing women, civilians, and babies. This is targeting the settlements where they've already pre-warned them to leave so that you can level the land and we can get it to the point where we can start over and undo the bad work, because Netanyahu failed in the mission of the forever war by successfully ethnically cleansing. Why? Because the GCC, Egypt, and Jordan didn't allow that to happen, while Iran resisted and the region unified around this operation. Some were doing it diplomatically. Others were preventing wars, allowing different parts to happen. And Iran was resisting, and it ends in the crescendo that we've been experiencing. So Iran then fires off hundreds of ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles. It gets to demonstrate how powerful it actually is. You know, that it fed off the colonizer, and all of these are real. Believe me, this is, if you watch that 11-minute video, you'll know, is it really extreme that our governments would go to these lengths? Yes, absolutely. This is what the dollar's backed by. This is the proof of weapons network. And so now we get the strategic weakening of the Iron Dome, the narrative that the Iron Dome can protect from the crazy people, the crazy Muslims that were trying to kill the Jews, the radicalist Islamist jihadists. Suddenly these rockets are able to get over, the ballistic missiles are able to get over, and Tel Aviv gets hit hard. Now they're hiding it from their own people, but those that are on the Iran side, they're seeing all the videos that are being leaked. So both people, two narratives are being pushed. Iran is strategically depleting. They get to be sovereign at the end of this. Israel is targeting the people that essentially are not on board with this mission. The Axis are being strategically weakened through multiple operations that I covered last time, like the pager attack, like what's happening with Hamas and various other things. And we're getting military campaign after campaign that is a new theater every single time. And I've got to admit it, I love watching the video. After 650 days of watching genocide, there's nothing that I'm enjoying more than seeing illegal settlements blown up. After everything we've experienced, I'm enjoying watching these things. Definitely don't want civilian casualties or anything. Israel will stick a few civilian casualties. They can't help themselves. I'm not saying that Iran signed up to any of their people being killed. They certainly didn't in terms of civilians. But Israel is back to old habits, maybe getting a little bit of revenge because they do genuinely hate each other. I'm not saying they're cooperating. This is pragmatic. This is power dynamics. This is game theory. This is not that they like each other. This is a new mutual interest, game theoretical outcome based upon multi-decades and colonial dollar weapons of mass destruction, both financially and militarily, being fired in the region. So since then, we've had about 16 to 20 maybe rounds of tit for tat, and each one leads to the degradation of campaigns between Israel key assets and Iran key assets. Essentially, this is fire all your bombs, de-weaponization, have a narrative that understands that Israel actually has illegal nukes, admit it, show that there is a Samson order so that later when the cabinet in Israel is regime changed and overturned, and Netanyahu negotiates his exit because he's up for prison, that we can eventually have a denuclearization and a one-state solution. I used to think that this could only be a two-state solution, which we know means illegal occupation. But now it looks like we're actually seeing the execution of a one-state solution. And this is the return to the pre-Rothschild British operation to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Remember, when it was the Ottoman Empire, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, they lived together in relative peace. The Palestinians never said that the Jews can't immigrate. What they didn't sign up for is raping, pillaging, and stealing, ethnic cleansing, and building a settler colonial empire to destabilize the region for the British Empire and now the American Empire and previously the French Empire. They didn't sign up for that. That's why this resistance is happening. Any resistance against it, you're told that it's terrorism. You see the deceit that they're willing to take you through. So anyway, this operation is taking away the key infrastructure, hit nuclear targets, hit energy targets, hit some of the ports, hit some of the liquid natural gas routes, hit the terminals, basically take out and vassalize Israel into a dependency where you can buy the assets in distress. Iran gets to, have a reflection of its power dynamics in the region. It gets to be independent. And finally, it gets to normalize with its neighbors. It doesn't mean that they buy into their ideology, just like Iran normalized with BRICS, Russia and China, very different ideologies. But now this made it possible. Iran, China, and Russia putting together barter networks where they could trade with each other was the real reason for BRICS. And then partnering with the GCC is the reason that we got here. And that's the reason why Trump was installed, in order to have tariff policy to reset the world order. And now it was taking over Syria so that they could launch the attack on Iran. And once you launch the attack on Iran, you have the strategic negotiated outcome that we're seeing right now in order to reset the world order and have a much, much better outcome for everybody in the Middle East, because the strategic tension from Operation Gladio is essentially ending right now. How do you solve the illegal settlement, the terrorists, the state-sponsored terrorists that Ben Gvir was funding and Mariam Adelson was buying Trump in order to take the West Bank and just have terrorism where they were taking Palestinians out of their home, burning their houses and building Israeli settlements? You just wipe out the settlements. And so you're seeing the settlements being targeted. You're seeing the hardliners on both sides being assassinated, the ones that wouldn't agree to the new regional vision. You've seen the Axis be strategically weakened. You saw that Syria, based upon the regions deciding what that operation would look like, you saw it have a temporary ex-ISIS person put in charge that Trump suddenly normalizes with. Sanctions are removed, and now we're able to launch this operation because something better is coming. And nobody gets what they want. Now, I'm not analyzing what I think should happen. You know if I put humanitarian hat on, you know how I think. You followed me enough if you've been involved in this. You know the atrocities that I think have been happening or what should happen. But this is the power dynamics on what is happening, not what should happen. This is where you have to follow the money and put two and two together, and then you're able to see what I think comes out. No regional state actor, I think, will join the war. This is contained, is precision outcome. It is real, but the outcome is understood. And essentially, the IRGC's axis basically no longer needed, and they normalize within the regions that they are. The ones that won't normalize have most likely already been taken out. But the reason they were taken out is because I believe it was allowed to happen. This is not betrayal. This is the execution of the next phase based upon the decolonization phase. This is the removal of the military-industrial complex using Israel to destabilize the region. This is the negotiation based upon different factions getting to the point where they could partner with BRICS and America can be moved back to, focusing on itself. But in order to get there, you have to have some geopolitical theater. This is a managed conflict that I think we're witnessing. It's not a war. It's an orchestrated proof of weapons network theater based upon the power dynamics of the GCC and the putting Iran where it has agreed to be, and the vassalization of Israel into a one-state solution. Now that bit is a bit more speculative, but denuclearization is required in order to happen, and I believe we're seeing the narratives in order to take away the power from the extreme Zionists that will then end up leaving back to where they want to come based upon a vision that they're probably not likely happy with. And the illusion of the irresistible force and the unmovable object is being weakened right in front of us. And I've got to say, nothing to do with civilian casualties or anything, but watching this is a great movie to watch after all the things that we've seen and what we've had to put up to. I believe that this is all, agreed to. Remember the power dynamics. The US is not sovereign. The US is controlled by the proof of weapons network, which is broken into the asset managers, the funders. Trump right now, he's more aligned with the banks than the military industrial complex in this side of the region. The military is doing operations in Europe, Asia Pacific, retreating from the Middle East, and just providing the cells, as this is not going to be a forever war. The GCC is going to be in charge of the region, which is a collective Gulf power sovereign nations, partnering with those that were vassalized, like Syria, Turkey to a degree, but also has its power, its military, Egypt and Iran, and resolving for finally the Palestinian cause. It's going to be, I believe, an outcome. It's pragmatic, not the ideal outcome, not the one that I'd like to see, but at least it's going to be working with neighbors that have to get on with each other rather than the unnatural ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the funding from USAID, the Western interference, the forever wars, the Afghanistan mission to use drugs and all sorts of trade to fund the deep state in the West, everything that was covered in Operation Gladio, and at the same time minimize casualties relative to the other dirty wars. So I don't believe that any escalation is planned. I don't believe that the US is going to be involved in this. I don't think that's a part of the script and the outcome. I think every strike is mediated and agreed, enforced by the GCC, which is their negotiations with the US proof of work logistics network. And the reason that it's being enforced is because there is more money to be made in this than the forever war, the old forever war model. All of what I think we're witnessing right now is containing the fallout. I don't think it's about igniting a greater regional war. I think everything is strategic outcomes. I think Iran is not collapsing. We're not going to see the collapse of Iran. It is normalizing, and it is about the removal of sanctions at the end of this. It's not going to be a Libya 2.0. It's not going to be a NATO chaos that leads to another forever war. It is basically a coordinated pivot based upon being able to agree certain outcomes where the vision collectively is too compelling for all and it's right for all in given the current power dynamics. The strike basically helps Iran shed various parts of the proxies, and this has been negotiated. I think this is over years, and this has been executed over months as well. And this is to prevent an internal revolt, despite the fact that we're seeing this already, that when you don't install, remember the way the colored revolutions work. You push the narrative. So we're seeing the narrative pushing. We see Netanyahu go out there and say, please revolt against your people. But the people are unifying, even if they hate their government. They hate IRGC. They hate Israel more, and they don't want this invasion to happen. And so they're unifying. It just shows you that it only happens when it's meant to happen, because CIA operatives or Mossad operatives are sparking off and pretending to be the people. And then people are joining that movement as well. Just going to turn the lighting down a bit. I've got my last bit of voice here. I told you this would happen as well. So essentially, I don't know how to say this without, this is not what I want to happen. This is what I believe is happening. The Axis is expendable at this point because it served its mission, and they will either normalize into the region or in fighting Israel, they're the ones that are being taken out right now. As I said, people need to die for this to happen. It's not what I want to happen. It's what I believe is happening. As I said, this isn't necessarily betrayal. This is survival, because you know what the outcome was for Iran. It was colored revolution. It was covert change. You saw all the operations. You saw everything. It was about using a false flag operations. And that's what I thinking. That's what I think we're essentially seeing right now. I don't think Khomeini is going to be taken out. I think this is, agreed in terms of the right strategy. Some people will be very offended by that, but I believe this is a pivot. And essentially, the GCC bloc, they've negotiated what they need to do. Khomeini is fully aligned. This has got the backing of essentially an IRGC drawdown with those eliminated that aren't meant to be there. And the strikes serve as the cover for normalization, because normalization would have covered a revolt with the hardliners, and this is the way of executing it. Iran is quietly shifting to alignment with BRICS and the GCC, and this is about economic integration and a significantly better future and a final resolution to the Palestinian cause, because Israel will be regime changed, the cabinet will fall eventually, this kind of the camouflage that's needed in order to get there. So what is Iran's goal, as I see it, based upon following the money? These are more speculative parts of this. But it's about joining the regional order. It's about securing the sanctions relief that they want to do. And it's about avoiding domestic chaos in order to get there. What are Israel's motives in doing this? Remember, Israel is just a faction of the military-industrial complex. Israel is essentially... not there to create the disruption for Iran anymore. And their goal has always been to do ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians and conquer the land on the behalf of the military and profit from war. But now their mission failed, because after October the 7th, it failed. The war will eventually, once this is resolved, I believe that finally we will end the final end to the genocide. A ceasefire will be announced, and I don't believe it will be returned to ever again. The illegal occupation will not be negotiated into this. Netanyahu isn't there to escalate after this, but at the moment he is negotiating his freedom, and they're doing it with genocide and destruction. But everybody has agreed, as I covered. I went through this last week, but essentially the military-industrial complex is getting their last bit of political capital, their last bit of profits, but they're not looking to create another forever war and do the old neocon strategy. The cabinet will collapse. I think that's imminent. I don't know how long it will take, but I think it's coming. I'll keep covering that as well. And what will happen to Israel's arsenal? It will essentially be denuclearized, controlled by the proof of weapons network. It will, it will not be controlled by Tel Aviv. And I think we're more likely to see denuclearization across the whole region, but no escalation, no proxy awakenings. We're not going to suddenly see Hezbollah come in and start attacking. I don't think that's part of the script. And no regional war. That's the most important thing. So expect escalation to de-escalate. And then eventually, you know who's going to take credit for it, even though it was BRICS working with the GCC and Iran, that they managed to build economic power and they managed to build resistance. But of course, Trump is going to take guarantee for it. Trump is going to take credit for it. But the GCC is essentially the guarantor. The guarantor is because deals have been done and the proof of weapons network gets to reinvest and make money, but the GCC will be co-investor in the deal, and Iran gets to remain, sovereign, true to its ideologies. And there's trillions of dollars at stake, and those trillions of dollars can't be made through the forever war because now that's the power dynamics of the region. The power dynamics of the region have changed, so there won't be a real war. The final act, I think, will be a ceasefire in Gaza, as I said, Netanyahu exit, Iran sanctions relief. I'm not sure of the time frame, but I think we're going to see it, and we'll cover it bit by bit. Israeli cabinet regime change, a peace plan, which will be essentially a real peace plan, and it will be executed by Egypt and the GCC, foreign direct investment, as well as local investment, alignment of interests. And essentially, the region managed to get what it wanted to get to. The US will take credit for saying that it's peace and prosperity. Trump will probably look to do that before the midterm election because right now he's losing a lot of his support. But this is peace for the Levant region. It is decolonization. It is something we've never seen before. I'm incredibly bullish in the outcome for the Middle East. I'm just so sad at the amount of death and destruction that's required in order to do this. I think Palestinian statehood is being engineered. I think it's inevitable. And Israel will be vassalized. And I think this ends in a one-state solution. And I really hope that this is what we're seeing right now. But by following the money, this is, I think, what we are seeing right now. Almost everybody disagrees with me. I think it will take weeks, months, years to know how this exactly planned out. But I think you're witnessing what this will look like as well. And so this is the coordinated transition. I'm enjoying every part of it. I think every single state has made concessions. This is not anyone bowing down. I think Egypt has made concessions. I think Jordan has made concessions. I think Syria has made concessions, based upon where they are and being able to build themselves out, just like Singapore, from a colonized state to a vassalized state to economic prosperity, if they play the games right. Everybody is playing their part. Iran played their part. The resistance was required. And all of this was the best result that could be, not the perfect result. It never is the perfect result. But there's not going to be a falling of Iran, and there's not going to be anything of these things. It's, again, engineered that the Levant is going to be free. And how you transition out of the Axis model and everything we have seen. So I don't think we're going to see a nuclear war. And I know that that's what is being pushed upon you. And I hope you enjoyed seeing basically what I think happens here. And I'll keep covering it. Join me on X, and I'll be covering it in real time as well. And make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're at 99,000 subscribers right now. I think once we get to 100,000 subscribers, I'm going to be able to get a review with YouTube. So please help me if you watch this video and you think more people need to understand this so they don't fall for it. Then please do subscribe. My voice reached exactly the end. I think I've gone as much as I can through this. We break it up into 3 parts. Everything builds upon each other. This week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. If you just watch the one part that you like, you can watch the other videos to see how it all fits together. And most importantly, always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get hurt. Others are going to do really well. We're transitioning to a world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. I want to make sure that you are on the right side of that change. In case YouTube takes me down, follow me on X. I'm at 199,000 followers. I'm trying to get to 200,000 next. Follow me on Rumble in case this goes down. We'll be going live on Rumble. And in case it all goes down, we've built a backup of everything at simondixon.com. And you can get a backup of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free, where you can get all sorts of goods. And I'll send you a newsletter as we go through this journey. So I hope we're going to be able to do this with peace, love, and unity. It's sad that so many need to die in order to get to the next phase. I didn't write the rules. I just try and follow the money and cover what I'm seeing. And I hope to see you on the other side. And I'll see you. This was Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 96, where we covered that Iran will not create World War III, despite the fact that they need you to believe that. So I'll see you this time next week on Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87. Peace.